Hello, everyone, and welcome to some Stops Along the Way, a special episode that is going to cover a topic that has been frequently asked of me by listeners, and that is what are some of the unique, intriguing, and weird things that have happened to you around the world? So this is an off-cycle episode. I've got this one and one next week that will air on Thursdays. Usually, this podcast, as you know, a new episode drops every Monday morning at 8 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Occasionally, I'll do an off cycle episode, and that's what the two of these are going to be. So they have really no connection with the theme that we are involved in right now on uh, the Some Stops Along the Way podcast, which is times of joy and times of sorrow. Although one could say that these experiences do fit into that theme, they're not part of the normal flow of the podcast. They're special episodes that I thought might interest you. So I want to jump into it. But before I do that, I want to remind you that my memoir, Some Stops Along the Way, is available on Amazon. If you haven't grabbed a copy of it yet, I hope you'll do that. Some of the stories that I'm going to tell are in this, and some you'll only hear right here on the podcast. Also, I've got several novels out at present, but two of them I want to highlight are these two: The Little Girls and The Ghost of Mariupol. The Little Girls is one of my most popular novels right now. The readers are really enjoying it. It's getting good reviews on Amazon. Love to have your review of it as well. It is a tale about three friends of different faiths in the old city of Jerusalem over a 60 year period of time. And it's something that it's a story I think that will really resonate with you, regardless of how much you know about the history of Israel and Palestine. The second novel that is really been of interest to a lot of readers is The Ghost of Mariupol. I started writing this novel when I was working in Ukraine, finished it when I got back to the States. It is a very poignant story and one that needs to be told and needs to be understood by people around the world. While it is a novel, it really focuses on the heartbreak and the tragedy of the war in Ukraine and how it impacts the lives of people. So if you haven't got your copy of The Ghost of Mariupol and The Little Girls yet, I hope you will do that. And by the way, all of the royalties from The Ghost of Mariupol go to support the Ukraine Society of Indiana to be used directly to support those activities it is doing to benefit the lives of the Ukrainian people. All right, let's jump into this special episode on some of the weird things that have happened to me around the world. And I'm going to start in the Republic of Georgia. And there's no way that I could ever cover all of the interesting and strange things that happened to me in the country of Georgia. I shouldn't have said Republic of Georgia. They don't like that, and I don't blame them. The country of Georgia, while I lived there for the better part of 4 years. But I'm going to share about three with you this morning. The first one is quite interesting because it speaks to one of the main programs that we were involved in while I was there. We were doing a significant initiative through the project that I led in trying to bring creative industries to Georgia: film, television, etc. And so, as such, we were courting, if you will, a number of producers and directors to try to convince them that the country of Georgia was the right place to produce their movies, television shows, etc. In fact, one of the first things we did after I arrived in Georgia is made a deal with Universal Studios to film a portion of Fast and Furious 9 in Tbilisi, Georgia. And our project supported that and got a lot of young people from Georgia involved in the production of that movie. So if you haven't seen Fast and Furious 9, you need to see it. And the portion that is filmed in the country of Georgia, specifically in Tbilisi, Georgia, was supported by our project. But the story I'm going to tell you has nothing to do with Fast and Furious 9. It came a little bit later when we were visited by, and I won't use her name, but a major movie and television producer. If I said her name, many of you would know who she is because she has been involved in some of the biggest movies and most popular television shows over the last 10 to 15 years and even longer than that, actually. So she was visiting us in Georgia. She was looking for a potential location for her television series that she was producing at that time to film one season of that television series. And so we took her on a familiarization tour around the country. And one of the places that we took her was to the Kakheti wine region of Georgia, which has many really interesting locations to film movies. So one evening, we took her to a winery that was owned by a friend of ours, Olaf and Ekaterina. And it was a beautiful evening. They had a Georgian supra, a Georgian feast that was unbelievable. They had singers there. And of course, because it's a winery, wine was flowing very, very copiously at that event. And the minute that we arrived, Debbie was with me, as well as some of my team from the project. And the minute that we arrived, Eka immediately threw her arms around Debbie. She'd never met Debbie before. And if you know Debbie, she's an introvert. And so she's not used to people just coming up and randomly hugging her. But Eka immediately threw her arms around her and welcomed her to the winery. And at first, Debbie shrunk away just a little bit and got tensed up a little bit. But as the evening unfolded, she and Eka became fast friends. I look at the pictures of that now, and with she and Eka at the end of the evening with their arms around each other, and they were having just a great, great time together. But that's only part of the story. The other part is that the more wine we drank, I was sitting by this television and movie producer, and she is trying to match the Georgians glass for glass. And then they added cha-cha, which is their hard plum liquor on top of that. And she's trying to match the Georgians glass for glass. And she's losing this battle, by the way. So at the end of the evening, everyone is quite intoxicated. And our host, Eka, asked this television and movie producer to stand up and say a few words. And so very, very gingerly, she stands up and wobbles just a little bit and begins talking. And she probably talked or rambled for 5 minutes or so in English. And I looked at Debbie and said, "Do you have any idea what she's saying?" Because she was just talking absolute nonsense and gibberish. She was barely even able to stand up. And the pictures that we took after that Supra, before we left for the evening, were hilarious because here is this top movie and television producer nominated for an Academy Award, had won several Emmy Awards, and she is barely functional in these pictures because she was not only a recipient of Georgian hospitality, which is some of the greatest in the world, she was a victim of Georgian hospitality in that case. And all the way home that night, we just sat in the car and laughed about how this event had really become a major memory of this movie and television producer's trip. And by the way, this producer remains a great friend of ours. And while she hasn't yet filmed an episode or a season, rather, of her show in Georgia, talks continue, and hopefully that will occur soon. But whether it does or not, I know that she'll never forget that night at the winery with our friends Olaf and Eka, and the introduction to Georgian hospitality that she got. Speaking of that, and by the way, many of the strange situations I got into in Georgia involved wine, because Georgia is the wine capital. Their tradition in wine, it goes back thousands of years. They're very proud of it. It's very good wine. And so shortly after I came there, we visited a monastery, a bishop at one of the major monasteries there in Georgia. And he oversaw a lot of the cultural heritage properties of the Georgian Orthodox Church. And because part of our project focused on tourism, we wanted to promote some of those iconic monasteries. But to do so, we had to really have his blessing. So we went over to his monastery to visit with him. And I would say we got there about 9 o'clock or so in the morning. And he immediately began serving wine. We talk, drink more wine, talk, drink more wine, eat food, drink more wine. By 1:30 or 2 in the afternoon, he is, let's say, feeling no pain. And at this point, he wants to show us the monastery. So I think that he's probably got a driver, but no such luck. We jump in a vehicle. He jumps behind the wheel. I get in beside him. I've got a couple of team members in the back seat, and he begins, in his inebriated state, driving to show us these monasteries. And we're driving through villages, and literally he's rolling down the window and blessing people out of the side of the vehicle. I'm texting my wife the whole time and saying I'm in a vehicle with a intoxicated priest who is blessing people in the middle of the street in small villages. And it was such a beautiful thing to witness, because it was so pure. There was no agenda about it. That bishop became a very good friend of ours. He remains a good friend of mine to this day. But it was just one of those things where Georgian hospitality merges with their culture, and it would be off-putting to some people, but to me, it was just an endearing memory of the country. Sometime later, we were at another monastery in Georgia. And to tell you the truth, I can't even remember what region it was in right now. But what I remember is that it had been raining. We'd been on these bad roads, and we went to look at this monastery that was well off the beaten path in one of Georgia's regions. And if you know much about Georgia, the wine region is relatively flat, but a lot of the rest of the country is very mountainous. And so you can get into some roads that are very treacherous, especially in bad weather. So we get to this monastery. We meet the priest. We talk about what we're trying to accomplish. Of course, having the archbishop's good graces, and because Georgians are hospitable people anyway, he wanted to show us around the monastery, feed us, etc. And so we tour this monastery. Well, at some point, he came around the corner. Debbie was inside of the monastery, looking at some of the frescoes, and the priest calls me and our friend Levon and our component lead Georgi around the corner. And he leads us down into this room that's underneath the cathedral, the church. And it is a crypt. It is literally filled with skulls and bones uh, of people buried there over generations. It was the equivalent of a mass grave. I mean, it wasn't a genocide or anything like that, but it was people had been buried there, and we were literally surrounded by skulls and bones. And that had happened to me before in Cambodia, but I didn't expect it in Georgia. So we're standing in the dark, and I'm shining this flashlight, and all you can see around are just skulls and skeletons. This was the wildest Halloween experience that you could ever have, but it was right there in the country of Georgia. I could go on and on about strange experiences in Georgia, but I'll stop right there. I also want to share some funny experiences I was part of in the country of Bhutan. Bhutan, for those of you who may not know, I've done a podcast episode on it, but it's a small country uh, in the Himalayas. It borders Nepal, it borders India, it borders China, and it's a tiny little country that is a Buddhist kingdom. And at the time that I was there, the king's name was Yemi Singhi Wangchuk. And the interesting thing about that country is they have a national dress. The women wear something called a kira, which is a long silk robe that are very brightly colored and elegant looking. And the men wear a robe that hits about at the knee called a go. And they usually wear argyle socks and dress shoes with those. And that is the national dress. Everyone who was a Bhutanese non-expat was required to wear that clothing. Well, when I was there, because Bhutan's a small country and because Thimphu, its capital, is the smallest national capital in the world, there was often let's say a lack of things to do. It wasn't a city that had a lot going on because it was deep in the Himalayas. It was a small city, and its infrastructure and its remoteness just didn't allow for that. But they had things like archery tournaments and market days, and so those of us that were working there would go and enjoy those things. But one of the most interesting events I attended my entire time in Bhutan was a fashion show that was held at the same hotel where I was living. And it was a show of Indian fashion. So they had Indian models come in and model all of these clothes that nobody in the country could wear because they had a national dress. And so I don't know whether it was just something to do or whether they wanted to buy these clothes to wear when they were outside of the country, but it seemed like everybody in Thimphu showed up for this event. And I was one of the guests of honor, being an expat, and I was sitting there near the ashes. There were four queens at that time in Bhutan. They were called the ashes, and they were there. Other members of the royal family were there. Most of the city was there to watch models highlight clothing that nobody in that room that was Bhutanese could wear. It was one of those strange things that you get into sometime, but I love the Bhutanese people and the culture in Bhutan. As a matter of fact, another interesting thing that happened to me there is that I would have my lunch every day near the UNDP office where I was working. And one of the places that I liked to go was called Swiss Bakery. And they had great pastries, they had great sandwiches. And so at lunchtime, I would usually go down to Swiss Bakery and get a sandwich and a pastry and a cup of coffee. And I would sit out at the traffic circle that was very nearby and on a bench and eat my lunch. The reason I sat at the traffic circle was that Thimphu is a small city. And very near the Swiss Bakery, they had this traffic circle with a very elegantly dressed traffic policemen there, and the people loved their traffic police there because they were very elegant, they were very well trained, and it was almost like watching a choreographed performance to sit there and watch him direct the traffic in and around that traffic circle. So, for lack of anything else to do, I would sit there and have my lunch. And there were many times when I would be joined by a Buddhist monk who would sit down beside me and we would have our lunch together and we would converse because everybody there spoke English. I learned so much about the Buddhist culture by sitting there and just chilling out and having my lunch and having the opportunity to do something that many people from the West have never had the chance to do. And that is to have a lengthy conversation, not just on one day, but on many days, with a Buddhist monk. Another interesting thing that happened when I was in Bhutan is I was traveling from the capital Thimphu down to the south part of the country to a town called Phuentsholing. And it was during the rainy season. The roads were very bad. They went through the jungle up over some mountains. These were bad, bad roads. And these were roads that you didn't really want to look down on because the drop offs were steep and there was jungle around you. And so one evening, on the way to Phuentsholing, we stopped for a restroom break. And the restroom was anywhere you wanted it to be because it was by the side of the road. So I step out. I walk a little ways down the road because there was a checkpoint up ahead. And I wanted to get a little bit removed from the checkpoint. So I walk up, and just as I'm getting ready to do what I needed to do, so to speak, I see this sign. And there's a sign that says, in English, "No urinating here by order of the king." And so I moved on down the road and did what I needed to do. But I thought, what a strange thing that they would put a sign right there that said, "No urinating by order of the king." Number one, why is it right in that spot? And number two, why did the king care where you urinated? Very odd. But that's part of working in countries where that have such a rich cultural palette like Bhutan. I love traveling there because the people were very hospitable, and even if they didn't know you, if you were passing by and it was around mealtime, especially when you're with as a foreigner, they would want you to come in and eat with them and drink tea with them. They were just beautiful, wonderful people, and I had some great experiences there. I'll go now to the country of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Sarajevo. I will admit that many of the strange and things that that happened to me in Sarajevo, I guess if you look at the theme that we're on now of times of joy and times of sorrow, many of them would be categorized in the times of sorrow because it was a very challenging project, but also just a tragic history of the country. And one of those tragedies, of course, was a debilitating war that they had in the 1990s from 1992 to 1996. This was an atrocious time in the history of that country, with Sarajevo, the capital, being surrounded and under siege for the better part of 4 years. And the Bosniaks were trapped in the city. The Serbs had surrounded it, were shelling from the hillside, put their snipers up on the hill. We lived just across the Miljaka River from a place they called Sniper Alley, where many Bosniaks lost their lives. from Serbian snipers on the hillside. Very, very tragic place. But the city was locked down so tight and under siege that that just the things they needed to survive, food, water, clothing, couldn't get into the city. And so the Bosniaks built a tunnel from the airport into the city. And the Serbs tried to target that tunnel so many times with their mortars and their other explosive devices, and they never could find that tunnel. Most of the tunnel now has been sealed up, but there is still part of it that is a museum called the Tunnel Museum in Sarajevo. And I had the opportunity to go there and to walk through part of that tunnel that was a lifeline for the Bosniaks to get personnel, equipment, and supplies in from the airport into the city during this siege. But what made it even more interesting was that our driver was with us. His name was Armin Cholak, Chola, we called him. Just an amazing individual. Debbie and I will always have a great affection for Chola. And as we're walking through the Tunnel Museum, before we went down into the tunnel itself, my interpreter Elmira and I were standing there, and we were looking at some photos on the wall. And one of them was of a Bosnian Special Forces soldier in a red beret who was sitting in the tunnel, and he was leaned over a rifle like this. And I look at it, and I look at Chola, and I look at the picture, and I look at Chola. So, is that you? And sure enough, it was Chola during the war, where he had served admirably in defending his country. And the price that he paid for that was a very brutal price. But it was just amazing to me to get to go through that museum with someone who had been through that period as a soldier and who was actually immortalized, if you will, not memorialized because he lived, but immortalized on the wall in the museum. Another thing that was very interesting in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I lived very close to and had the chance many times to walk through the facility where in the 1984 Olympics it had been the ice hall, and it is actually the building where Torval and Dean got their perfect 10 in ice dancing. And just to be able to stand in that building and then to go to some of the other ruined Olympic sites, the ski jumping, the bobsled, that had been destroyed in the war but still exist in a dilapidated form today, to be able to stand there and look at something that had been so pure, that had been something that had unified the Bosniaks, the Croats, and the Serbs, now in ruins. It was a metaphor for the country, really. And something I will never forget about Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm going to stop right there because most of the other experiences that I could tell you about Bosnia and Herzegovina would certainly broke my heart and would break yours as well. But it's a fascinating country, and if you ever have the chance to go there, take it, because it is an amazing, amazing place. Speaking of tragedy and sorrow, I'll share something with you from Romania as well. I had the chance to travel to the north of the country to a place called Sighet and visit Sighet's prison. Now, Sighet is also the home of Elie Wiesel, who won the Nobel Prize and wrote a book that is very important to me. I carry it with me everywhere that I've ever traveled outside of the country. I've carried this book with me. It's called Night. If you haven't read it, you definitely should read it. It is Elie Wiesel's memories of his time in the concentration camps in World War II. But also there is a prison, a political prison, where the communist rulers of Romania had sent those who opposed them. It started as a prison for criminals, but then it became more of a political prison. And to walk through those halls and to see the cells and to see the places where people were tortured, not because they were criminals, but because they simply had a different political philosophy than Ceausescu and his contemporaries, was absolutely heartbreaking. But it's a story that needed to be told. And on the same day that I visited there, I left that prison feeling, well, it was just a heaviness in my chest, just feeling bad. But then we traveled to a place that turned all that around. It was called the Mary Cemetery. And it is a cemetery in northern Romania, beautiful wooden headstones, nicely painted, and each of them has something humorous about the person who is buried there. So they're not epitaphs like you would see in a U.S. cemetery. These were actually funny poems or stories about the people who were buried there. And it's colloquially called the Mary Cemetery. And it's the only cemetery I've ever gone to in my life where you leave feeling good and laughing, because some of these stories are so funny. I always said that they should do a book for tourists that translates them into English, because as my interpreters would read some of these stories to me, it just made you laugh out loud. Only in Romania. Again, I could tell you so many stories about interesting things that occurred while we were in Romania, from visiting Bran Castle, Dracula's castle, in air quotes, to riding Lipizzaner stallions, and almost having a very bad day by falling off of one. Just an amazing experiences in Romania, one after the other, including buying very pungent cheese and homemade plum brandy by the side of the road, using your own container, by the way, which is another story for another day. Now I'll go to Vietnam. Again, so many things I could share here, but one of the stories I wanted to share about Vietnam is my visit to the Hollow prison complex. For Americans, we may know it better as the Hanoi Hilton, because that's what our American pilots who were in prison there during the Vietnam War called it. This is where John McCain was in prison, among others. And I wanted to, when I went to Hanoi, before our work started there, I specifically wanted to tour that prison, which is called Maison Centrale, the central prison, but was used first to house prisoners of war and criminals during the French war, the Indochina War in Vietnam, and later on housed the American pilots who were captured during the Vietnam War. And my minder there, Lee, very lovely lady, and if you've heard my episode on Vietnam, you've heard me talk about Lee very favorably. But I kept saying, I want to go see Maison Centrale. And she said, later, later, later. She kept putting me off. It was obvious she really didn't want to take me there. But finally she said, I'll take you there, but first we have to go see Chairman Ho. And so I had to stand in this long queue and wind my way through the Ho's mausoleum to see dead Ho Chi Minh, who had been embalmed and lying there in state, and pay my respects. And finally, she took me to the Hanoi Hilton. And in walking through that prison complex, I had the chance to sit in the cell where John McCain had spent years within that prison. It was a soulless place, a dark, evil, soulless place. And as we were coming out of one of the prison corridors, I walked into a room that during the housing of American prisoners there had been called the Green Room. It was the room where they interrogated the pilots and tortured many of them. And now it is a room that's dedicated to that area of their history. And there were many pictures on the wall. And one of the pictures was of a former American prisoner there by the name of Charlie Plum. And they had forced him to pose for a propaganda photograph where he was standing in church because they wanted to show that the American pilots weren't mistreated, they were allowed to worship, etc. And so he's standing there in his prison clothes in church. And I'm looking at that picture and I look at Lee. I look at that picture again. I said, Lee, is he giving the finger? And sure enough, Charlie Plum was making his statement that they can force me to be here. They can use this as propaganda, but I'm going to flip them the bird the whole time. And Lee was not pleased that I pointed that out and didn't speak to me for about an hour and a half after that. But I got a big chuckle out of it, and I will never forget that moment inside of Howlow Prison, the Hanoi Hilton. I want to take you to Morocco as well. Great experiences there, but one of Debbie's and my endearing experiences in Morocco, actually there are two I want to share with you. One of them was soon after we arrived in the country. We had the chance to go to Casablanca. And Casablanca is a beautiful city. I like it very much. It's somewhat overwhelmed by places like Marrakesh, where a lot of the tourists go. But Casablanca is a beautiful city and has a lovely ancient Medina there. But the important thing for me, one of the things I really wanted to see there was Rick's Cafe. If you've seen the movie Casablanca, you know all about Rick's Cafe. Well, it actually exists, by the way. It exists in a very similar look to what it is in the movie, in a villa near the marina there. An American lady actually bought that villa and rejuvenated it to make it look like Rick's Cafe in the movie. And so Debbie and I had our picture under the sign. We went inside and we had dinner with our friends in Rick's Cafe. It was like you were on a movie set. You really expected that you were back in the 40s and that Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman were just going to walk out and sit at the bar. I mean, it was that real of an experience. But we're sitting there having dinner, and a pianist comes out and begins to play, and his name is Issam. The funny thing about that, of course, is the pianist in the movie Casablanca was Sam. Play it again, Sam. Well, this was Play It Again, Issam. And he begins to play, and he plays a few songs, and then he gets up to go, and everyone's just looking at him. And he looks at us and says, "Oh, okay. You want to hear it? Okay, fine." And he sits down and he begins to play, "You must remember this. A kiss is still a kiss." And it was a surreal moment with the owner of Sam's Cafe sitting at the end of the bar like Humphrey Bogart did so many times in the movie. And this pianist named Issam playing the title song to the movie. Amazing place. If you ever get to Casablanca, you really need to go there. Another enduring place in Morocco for Debbie and I was the Medina in Fez. And what I want to share with you now is quite funny, but it's also tragic in one way. We went to the Fez Medina, and it's a beautiful old Medina, one of the largest continually occupied ancient Medinas in the world. And the night before we went there, we sat at the La Merindes Hotel on the hillside overlooking this beautiful Medina, and we heard the calls of prayer go off, and all over the old Medina, throughout the ancient city of Fez. Absolutely astounding. Something we'll never forget. But the next day, we went with our friend, our Moroccan friend, to the Medina, and he is walking us through there. And he walks us to a portion of the Medina where they are dyeing wool. And this dye stinks to high heaven. I mean, the wet wool and the dye, it just is an atrocious smell. And so he provided mint leaves to put under our noses. And as we're walking in, he realizes I've got my mint leaf just holding it down by my side. He said, "Mr. Mark, it's going to stink." And I said, "Look, I can't smell a thing because I can't." That's a long story in itself, but I can taste, but I can't smell anything. It has nothing to do with COVID. I just can't smell. And so there we were. Everyone else is just huffing these mint leaves because the stink is so bad. And I walk in there and I'm standing, no problems, surveying this ancient craft of dyeing wool. And our guy got a big kick out of that. And over lunch, that was a topic of a lot of laughter that, I miss so much because I can't smell the beautiful things in the world, like flowers and bread baking. But I also can't smell the bad things in the world, like wet wool and the dyes in the ancient Fez Medina. I'll take you now to the old city of Jerusalem, a city that I love so much. It almost makes me emotional to think that I had the opportunity to live and work there and to walk the steps that of those biblical heroes that I grew up reading about, and that my mother would so love to have walked in herself, but never had the chance. But it was a daily part of my daily life. And often I would leave my where I was staying in East Jerusalem, either the American Colony Hotel or the Ambassador Hotel, and walk down to the old city of Jerusalem on my day off. And I would leave before the sun rose. And by the time I got to Damascus Gate in the old city of Jerusalem, which is the gate, by the way, that the Apostle Paul exited from on the road to Damascus, and leads into the Arab quarter of the old city. By the time I got there, the sun was rising, and I would walk through the old city, down the Via Dolorosa to all the iconic attractions before the tourist arrived, with just me and a few locals that were out that early going about their business. Because later in the day, the tourists would come and they would clog everything up, and it was a pretty harrowing experience. But I got to know the old city so well that I could navigate it even in the dark. And so I would go down at dawn and walk with almost no one there and reflect on the amazing nature of these iconic locations. And then after my walk, I would make my way to the Austrian hostel. And by the way, the Austrian hostel is featured in my book, The Little Girls. And I would go there sometimes with a colleague, sometimes by myself, to the Austrian hostel, which is right off the Via Dolorosa. And by the way, there's no sign on it. You just have to press the button and get buzzed in. And there was a restaurant there where you could get excellent apple strudel and coffee. And we would sit and have our apple strudel and coffee, get yelled at by the nun and chased by her little dog, and then make our way to the roof of the Austrian hostel where you could see over the old city. It was just a fantastic place and something that I will never forget. Where I stayed in East Jerusalem, which is the Muslim area or Arab area of Jerusalem, there was a mosque right outside of my window. And so my wake up call every morning was the call to prayer. And that was a great time for me to jump out of bed, go down and do my walk in the old city, and then top that off with an amazing apple strudel and coffee at the Austrian hostel. Something that is endearing for me and that I will never forget. I'm going to take you to Afghanistan now. Oh, some of the things that we got into in Afghanistan, quite frankly, I'm not going to go into here because you wouldn't believe them if I told you. But I will share just a few things. One that I was not going to share, but my friend Basmela Karam, who was my project manager while I was there, actually reached out to me on Facebook and said, you have to share this one. And it was about the debacle of the AK-47. My deputy chief of party at that time, I was in Afghanistan for almost 4 years, as you know, if you've watched those episodes on the podcast. And I had two deputy chiefs of party while I was there. And my second DCOP was a guy named Tim. And Tim was former military. He was just a great guy, worked hard. But he had been on a trip to another part of the country. And I still am not sure how it happened, but he came back with an AK-47 on the PRT airplane, by the way. He took it on the airplane with him, which would never happen probably anywhere else in the world. But he comes back with his AK. And he comes in the office, he shows it to me and says, can I keep it? And I tell him, look, fine, whatever. Just make sure it's not loaded and you can keep it here in the office. And so I went about my business. He leaned the AK over against the wall in the corner by his desk. So fast forward probably a year or a little more, and Tim has left Afghanistan by that time. And of course, he couldn't take the AK-47 with him back to the States, and so it was still leaning in that corner. So a new guy that had just arrived in Afghanistan, an American, I had been introduced to him and invited him over to get acquainted, invited him over for dinner. So after work, he comes in and he's standing in my office and he sees that AK-47 in the corner. And he says, wow, an AK. I've never seen one up close. And I picked it up because it was unloaded and said, yeah, it's one of the most functional guns in the whole world. It's almost unjammable. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, all you have to do, it's very easy to use. All you have to do is pull back this lever, point, and pull the trigger. And I pointed the AK. One side of our office was nothing but windows from floor to ceiling. And I pointed and pulled the trigger, and it blew windows out like crazy because although I told him to, Tim had never unloaded this AK. Had a full magazine in it, and I blew windows out of the side of our office. Our guards come running. They think we're under attack. My staff is running in every direction. This poor guy named Mike, who just visiting his second day in country. He's on the floor behind my desk, laying on the floor, rolling around, and all you can hear are AK casings pinging off the rock floor. And so I finally stop. These windows are blown out. The guards run in. I hand them the AK, say, "Get this thing out of here. I never want to see it again." And so the only time that we came under attack in our office with an AK-47, I was the culprit. And it happened from the inside because I thought it was unloaded. And fortunately, I wasn't pointing at anyone. There's a cautionary tale for all of you youngsters that are learning to use guns. Never point them at anybody. In this case, it would have been a disaster because it had a full magazine, and I blew the windows out of the side of our office. That was the absurdities in Afghanistan happened virtually every day. We had a housekeeper there. Her name was Mrs. Nikidar, and she was a very small lady, and had never had any experience with technology. And so when she became our housekeeper, she would clean with this little homemade broom, and it just wasn't doing the job. And so I had our team go out and search all through Kabul to find a vacuum sweeper. And they finally found one at the PX. And so we bought this vacuum sweeper. And it was one of those kind that was round, and you pulled it across the floor on wheels, and it had a hose that came up and then a nozzle at the end that sucked up your dirt. Well, what I didn't realize is that A, Mrs. Nikidar never used anything like this. And number two, she was a small lady, and this was such a big machine. And so one day she's coming down the stairs, trying to lug this thing down the stairs of our office, and she's got the hose wrapped around her, and the expats in my office are just laughing because she's just struggling, trying to get this thing down the stairs. And she looked like one of the guys from Ghostbusters that had the guns where they were shooting the ghosts. She has this hose just wrapped around her. And I looked at my deputy and said, "Who you going to call?" "Mrs. Nikidar, Dustbuster." And we are just laughing so loud, and the Afghans have no idea what's going on. They don't think this is out of nature at all. But Mrs. Nikidar, there's so many stories. We were supposed to lay things out on our bed that she would launder for us. And I had a sweater that Debbie had got me, a polo sweater that was all wool. That I loved that sweater, not just because Debbie got it for me, but also because it looked really good. And I always hung it up. Well, one day I forgot to do that, and you know what happened? Nikidar washed it, and by the time I got to my room that night, it was the size of a cat sweater. Who you going to call? Dustbuster, Mrs. Nikidar. The final one in Afghanistan I'll share with you is a night when we were taken out to a very rural area in the Panjshir Valley. And we literally sat on the ground by a river under a tent and had dinner with one of the scariest warlords. And I met many of the warlords there, those that you've read about and those that you haven't. But this guy was, if this was scary, he was here. Okay, scary. Crazy eyes, militia all around, heavily armed, firing up into the air. We sat and had a meal with him in the middle of nowhere. My team didn't even know where I was. And by the time I got back to Kabul, it was dark. The team was waiting there for me. They had no idea where I was. Everybody was frantic. But I was probably in the safest situation I could have been in because I was with the scariest warlord out there that no one wanted to mess with. And so just sitting there having dinner with him Even though it felt like I was in danger, actually, I was probably in the safest place that I could have been. I have many, many more warlord stories I could tell you, but I will stop right there. I'm going to end this particular episode, and we've got another one coming up where I'll share other interesting stories, but I'm going to end this one with a game of golf that I played with a senior government official in Islamabad, Pakistan. And the interesting thing about this is that we played at the Islamabad Country Club, which is only you can only play there if you're a senior government official or a member of the military. So the public can't play there, and they assign you a caddy. This is like an old British colonial golf club, where, of course, the senior British officials used to play when they were in Pakistan, but now the government officials and the army plays there. And so during my project there, I was asked to play golf with a senior government official, and I show up there, and we tee off at like 5:30 in the morning. And this man is dressed in designer golf clothes. I mean, like he was on the PGA tour. I mean, everything branded. Looked very smart, looked very regal, and he was quite a good golfer as well. And so we began playing and talking, and we're walking the course. And the more I talked to this man, who is a general in the military, the more I talk to him, the more I'm getting the feeling that he's a much higher level government official than I thought he was. And it wasn't until the eighth hole that I was told who he actually was. He was a minister of Interior of Pakistan, a very powerful position. And I will say this, I'm not the greatest golfer, but up until the eighth hole, I had played the best golf of my life, and I was well ahead at the eighth hole. But then after I found out who this was and his role in the government, and the fact that beating him would not have been in my best interest, my game fell apart over the last 10 holes, believe me. And so I had to endure over lunch him giving me a hard time about how I'd lost my game, and that I'd started so well and then fallen apart, when actually it was self-preservation. We needed to work with the government there. The last thing I wanted to do was irritate him. I'm not saying I could have beat him. I probably would have. I probably wouldn't have anyway. But I can guarantee you that I made up my mind on the eighth hole when I found out who he was, that there's no chance that even if there's a 1% chance of me beating him, it's not going to happen. And so psychologically, I just fell apart from there on. My game was horrendous. But we actually had a great conversation. He helped us a great deal in what we were trying to do. And so if losing a golf game can generate that type of support, then I'm all for it. No problem whatsoever. Well, I hope you've enjoyed some of these stories, and I'm going to share some more with you on our second special episode. But until then, join us for some stops along the way every Monday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern, U.S. Eastern Time, to hear about some of the most interesting countries in the world through the lens of my work there and their history, their culture, and their geopolitics. Until next time, I'm Mark McCord, and this is Some Stops Along the Way.